Clayton Merrick's headlights cut through the blizzard at 4:18 in the morning. The wind screamed across Highway 29 like something wounded and furious. His diesel engine ground against the cold, wipers frozen mid-arc against a windshield already thick with ice. He'd been checking fence line when he saw it, a dark shape wrong against the white, something metal catching his high beams. The station wagon lay overturned in the ditch, passenger door torn open. He killed the engine and the silence hit harder than the wind. Two bodies inside, a man slumped over the wheel, neck bent wrong, a woman half out the back door, one arm reaching. Then he heard it, a sound so thin it barely carried over the storm, a child crying. She was under a tarp near the rear wheel, wrapped in a blanket gone stiff with frost, maybe 9 years old, lips blue as creek ice. In her frozen hands, she clutched a manila envelope so tight he couldn't pry it loose. When he wrapped his sheepskin coat around her and lifted her, she weighed almost nothing. The CB radio in the wreck still crackled. A man's voice breaking up. Vernon knows. Don't trust. Clay looked back once as he carried her to his truck. A semi-sat stopped a quarter-mile up the road, driver's silhouette visible in the cab. By dawn, the whole county would know. He turned onto the ranch road. The girl's breathing came shallow and wrong. His porch light glowed ahead, but Deputy Marshal's cruiser was already parked in his driveway, red and blue lights painting the snow. Clay pushed through his front door sideways, the girl still bundled in his coat. The house smelled like cold stone and yesterday's coffee. Bonnie Tate looked up from the fireplace where she'd been banking coals, took one look at the child's face, and moved. Get those wet clothes off her, Clay said. I'll heat broth. Whoa, yeah. Deputy Marshal stood by the door, hat in hand, snow melting off his boots onto the pine floor. Clay, I got a call about a wreck on 29. That her? 2 dead. Parents, looks like. Clay set the girl on the chair nearest the fire. She didn't let go of the envelope. Her eyes tracked everything, the rifle over the mantel, the grandfather clock ticking in the corner, Marshal's badge. She needs warming before she needs questions. Bonnie knelt, murmuring soft words Clay couldn't make out, peeling away frozen denim in a coat too thin for January. The girl's arms were mottled purple and white, old bruises yellowed beneath. Bonnie's mouth tightened, but she kept her voice gentle. There now, honey. We'll get you sorted. Clay heated milk on the stove, added honey the way he used to, for he stopped that thought cold. On his dresser in the next room, his grandfather's pocket watch sat where it always did, gold case catching lamplight. Time favors the patient man, the inscription read. He hadn't wound it in 15 years. The girl took the warm mug in shaking hands but didn't drink, just held it like she was trying to remember what warmth felt like. I need to know her name, Marshal said. State police will want a report by noon. She needs rest more than she needs paperwork. Clay pulled a quilt from the back of the sofa, Martha's quilt, the one she'd finished the week before the accident. Bonnie wrapped it around the girl's shoulders. Marshall sighed, wrote something in his notebook. I'll tell them you're cooperating, but Clay, this is going to bring questions. You know that. Let them ask. When Marshall left, the tick of the grandfather clock filled the silence. The girl's breathing had steadied, but her eyes stayed open, watching Clay like he might disappear if she blinked. You got a name? He asked. Nothing. Place you need to call? Kin? Her fingers tightened on the envelope. For the first time, Clay really looked at it. Manila, water-stained, bent at the corners. Across the front, in faded red stamp, Latimer, Landcombe. Fraud. The girl's mouth moved. The words came out scratched and small. He killed them. Don't let him take the papers. Clay's blood went cold. Who killed them? But she'd used up what little voice she had. Her eyes drifted closed. Bonnie touched his shoulder. Let her sleep, Clay. Morning's soon enough. He sat in the chair beside her as dawn crept gray through the windows, watched her breathe, noticed how her hand never left that envelope, even in sleep. Earl Tate came in at 6 with the smell of diesel and cattle feed on his coat, took one look at the scene and said nothing, just poured himself coffee and stood by the window. After a long while, that Vernon's company name on that envelope? Yeah. He knows she's here? Not yet. Earl grunted, set his cup down. Then he will by breakfast. Deputy Marshal's wife works at the bank, and the bank opens at 8. Clay looked at the girl, at Rosie, though he didn't know her name yet, small and broken and holding evidence of something bad enough to kill for. His daughter Sarah had been 8 when she died. This girl was maybe 9, close enough to hurt. Get the truck ready, Clay said. We're going to town. Clay. She needs to eat, needs to be seen. Hiding her makes it look like I've got something to hide. Earl studied him. You sure about this? Clay wasn't sure about anything except that the girl's parents were dead, and she'd whispered he killed them, and the only name on that envelope was his business partner's. But he'd spent 15 years doing nothing but being sure. Sure he'd stay alone, sure he'd never risk caring again, sure the world was safer if he just kept his head down and worked his land. That kind of sure had left him hollow. Get the truck, he said again. By 7:30, they were headed into red dust. The girl sat between Clay and Earl, still wrapped in Martha's quilt, the envelope pressed against her chest. The sky had cleared to that hard blue you only get after a blizzard. Everything looked clean and new and frozen solid. June's diner sat on Main Street, windows fogged with breakfast heat. Clay could see shapes inside, early risers, ranch hands, the weekday coffee crowd. He pulled into a parking spot and cut the engine. The girl looked up at him, terrified. You're safe, Clay said, and hoped to God it wasn't a lie. When they walked through that diner door, Vernon Latimer was already sitting in the corner booth. The smell hit first, bacon grease and burnt coffee, and the particular sweetness of pancake batter on a hot griddle. The jukebox in the corner played Waylon Jennings low. Every head in the diner turned when Clay walked in with the girl. June Holbrook looked up from behind the counter, coffee pot in hand, and her face did something complicated. She'd known Clay since he was 20, known Martha, known Sarah. She set the pot down careful and came around the counter. Clay Merrick, it's been a month of Sundays since you darkened my door for breakfast. Her voice stayed light, but her eyes were on the girl. And who's this? Found her on Highway 29. Parents didn't make it through the storm. The diner went quiet except for the jukebox and the sizzle of the grill. Clay felt the weight of every stare. Dutch Hendricks at the counter, the Morrison brothers by the window, Frank Newley and his crew from the rail yard, and Vernon Latimer in the back booth, coffee cup halfway to his mouth, eyes locked on the manila envelope visible under the girl's arm. June's mouth tightened. Well then, let's get some food in her. You like pancakes, son, honey? The girl nodded once. Small. They took a booth near the front. Clay sat, so his back was to the wall, the girl beside him. Earl took the opposite seat, positioned so he could watch the room. Old habits from old days. Vernon stood, smoothed his suit jacket, too fine for red dust, charcoal wool that probably cost more than most men here made in a month. His boots clicked on the linoleum as he crossed the diner. The cologne reached them before he did, something sweet trying to cover something else. Clay. Vernon's smile didn't touch his eyes. Heard you had some excitement last night. News travels. Small town. Vernon glanced at the girl. This the child from the wreck? Poor thing. Must have been terrifying. He slid into the booth next to Earl without being invited. Lucky you found her. Any idea who her people were? The girl went rigid. Her hand crept toward Clay's arm. Not yet, Clay said. Deputy Marshal mentioned there were documents in the vehicle. Family papers probably. Might help with identification. Vernon's eyes stayed on the envelope. If you need help sorting through any of that, Clay, I'd be happy to assist. I know this kind of thing. Orphaned child, legal questions. It can get complicated fast. June arrived with orange juice and coffee. Set them down harder than necessary. Anything else you need, Vernon? Or are you just socializing before work? Just being neighborly, June. But he didn't move. Clay, we should talk. About the partnership. I've been meaning to bring something up. The girl knocked over her juice. It spread across the table in a bright orange flood, dripping onto her lap. She froze completely, face gone white, like she was waiting for something terrible to happen. Clay grabbed napkins. It's all right. Just a spill. But she'd started shaking, not from cold this time. Vernon watched her with something calculating behind his smile. Jumpy little thing. Probably in shock. You might want Doc Sims to take a look, Clay. Make sure she's stable. He stood. I'll let you folks eat. But Clay, we do need to talk, soon, about that partnership agreement. Certain clauses we put in for protection. You remember. He left a $5 bill on the counter for coffee he'd barely touched and walked out. Through the window, Clay watched him climb into a Lincoln Continental, black and gleaming even under road salt. What clauses? Earl asked quietly. Nothing that matters right now. But Clay's jaw was tight. June brought pancakes and bacon, sat down in Vernon's empty seat without asking. Clay, I'm going to speak plain. That man's interested in that envelope and not in any good way. And if he's talking about partnership clauses, June, listen to me. You've been holed up on that ranch 15 years. Good man, hard worker, honest as the day, but you don't see what everyone else sees. Vernon Latimer's got his fingers in every deal in this county, and every single one of them stinks if you get close enough. Clay cut into the girl's pancakes. Smaller pieces, added butter and syrup. She watched his hands like she was memorizing the motion. "What's your name, honey?" June asked, voice gentle now. The girl's whisper barely carried. "Rosie." "Rosie, that's pretty. I'm June. You eat up now, Rosie. You're safe here." But Rosie's eyes stayed on the door where Vernon had left. And when she finally picked up her fork, her hand shook so hard she could barely hold it. 10 days later, Vernon came to the ranch. Clay was splitting wood behind the barn when he heard the Lincoln's engine, that particular purr of money and maintenance. He set down the axe and walked around front. Vernon stood on the porch, briefcase in hand, looking like a lawyer about to serve papers. "Thought I'd stop by, see how you and the girl are settling in." Vernon set the briefcase on the porch rail, clicked it open. "Brought some paperwork, guardianship forms mostly, temporary custody applications. Thought I'd help expedite things." "Didn't ask for help." "Clay," Vernon's smile thinned. "You can't just keep a child without legal standing. State's gonna ask questions. Social services, courts, it gets messy. But if we file the right forms, show you've got resources, community support, a partner vouching for your stability, it smooths the process." "Why do you care?" "Because we're partners. Because I don't want to see you get jammed up over a good deed." Vernon pulled out a form, held it up. "This just needs your signature. Simple temporary guardianship. Then we can work on permanent placement." Through the window, Clay could see Rosie inside with Bonnie, learning to gather eggs from the henhouse basket. She'd been here 10 days, barely spoke, woke up screaming twice a night, but yesterday she'd smiled when the rooster chased Earl across the yard. "I'll handle it myself," Clay said. Vernon's face hardened for just a second. Then the smile came back, sharper. "Of course. Your choice." "But Clay, that envelope she had, the one from the wreck, it had my company name on it. If there are documents inside related to business dealings, legally I'd need to see them. Client confidentiality issues, liability." "Get off my land, Vernon." The smile died completely. Vernon closed the briefcase with a snap like a bone breaking. "That partnership agreement we signed back in '71. Remember Clause 14B? About management fitness reviews. We put that in after your incident, after Martha and Sarah, just to protect the operation if anything ever compromised your ability to run things properly." Clay's blood went cold. "I'm not saying there's a problem," Vernon continued, climbing into his car. "Just reminding you it exists. Sudden changes in behavior, taking on unexpected dependence, emotional instability, those are all triggers for review. 90-day process, board evaluates, makes decisions." He started the engine. "Just something to keep in mind. I'd hate to see this situation cost you everything you've built." The Lincoln rolled down the drive, leaving tracks in the February mud. Earl came around the barn, shotgun broken over his arm from checking fence. "What did he want?" "To threaten me." Clay watched the car disappear. "And to scare me into giving him that envelope." "You gonna?" Clay looked back through the window. Rosie stood at the glass now, small hand pressed against the pane, watching him, making sure he was still there. "No," Clay said. "I'm going to find out what's in it." February came in cold and stayed that way. The ground froze so hard Earl broke 2 post-hole diggers trying to repair fence line. At night, the mercury dropped to 10 below, and the cattle huddled in the windbreaks, their breath rising like smoke. Rosie slept in Sarah's old room. Clay had left it untouched for 15 years, the bed made, the curtains drawn, a layer of dust over everything like snow that never melted. Bonnie had cleaned it in an afternoon, opening windows despite the cold, washing sheets that smelled like time and grief. The girl barely spoke, moved through the house like she was afraid the floor might give way, but she watched everything, learned the rhythms, when Clay made coffee at 5, when Earl came in for breakfast at 6:30, when Bonnie arrived to start the day's cooking at 7. On the 20th morning, Clay woke before dawn to find Rosie already dressed, standing by the kitchen door in Sarah's old boots. Too big, but she'd stuffed the toes with newspaper. "Where you headed?" he asked. "Wherever you're going." He almost said no, almost sent her back to bed where it was warm and safe. But something in her face, the set of her jaw, the steadiness in her eyes, reminded him that safety was something you earned, not something you were given. "Barn then, cows calving, could use an extra set of hands if you're not squeamish." She followed him out into the dark. The cold bit through her coat, his old work jacket, rolled at the sleeves, but she didn't complain, just walked where he walked, matched her steps to his. The barn smelled like hay and warm animals and the particular sweetness of grain dust. The cow was on her side in the stall, breathing hard, her eyes rolling white. "She's in trouble," Clay said, kneeling beside her. "Calf's breech. Gotta turn it, or we lose them both." Rosie stood at the stall door, watching. Clay stripped off his coat and shirt, rolled up his sleeves. The cow bellowed low and terrified. "Talk to her," he told Rosie. "Let her know she's not alone." Rosie came closer, hesitant, put her hand on the cow's neck and started murmuring. Words Clay couldn't make out, but the tone was soft and steady. He reached in, felt the calf's hindquarters where the front hooves should be, and started working. The cow kicked once, hard, catching him in the ribs, but he kept going. Minutes stretched. His shoulders screamed. Sweat ran cold down his back despite the winter air. "Got it," he said finally. "Head's coming now. Rosie, when I say pull, you grab those front legs and pull straight toward you. Don't be gentle. Life doesn't come gentle." She moved beside him, didn't flinch when her hands went slick with blood and birth. When he said pull, she pulled. The calf came all at once, sliding onto the straw in a rush of fluid and steam. It lay still for a terrible moment. Then Clay cleared its nose and mouth, rubbed its ribs hard, and the calf coughed and tried to stand. Rosie was crying, not sobbing, just tears running quiet down her face. "That's life," Clay said. "Doesn't look like much at first, but it keeps trying." The calf found its feet, wobbled to its mother, and started nursing. The cow turned her head, exhausted and calm now, and licked her baby clean. "Can I name her?" Rosie asked. "It's your calf. You helped bring her into the world." "Hope," Rosie said. "Her name is Hope." Earl found them an hour later, sitting on hay bales, watching the calf stumble around the stall. He leaned against the doorframe, said nothing for a while. Then, "That girl's got more sense than half the hands I've hired. Clay, she's good for you." Clay didn't answer, just watched Rosie watching Hope. That afternoon, Earl mentioned it to his wife. Bonnie mentioned it to June at the grocery. And June, who'd kept the diner running through 3 recessions and 2 wars by knowing exactly when to speak and when to listen, started paying attention. On the last day of February, Clay took Rosie into town for clothes. She'd been wearing Sarah's things, too small or too big, nothing quite right. At Morrison's Dry Goods, Mrs. Morrison pulled out jeans and flannel shirts, measured Rosie's feet for boots. "Growing girl needs proper fit," she said, wrapping everything in brown paper and string. Clay paid cash, saw Vernon across the street standing outside the bank, watching. Vernon raised his hand in a wave that looked like a warning. They stopped at June's on the way out of town. The diner smelled like meatloaf and fresh bread. June brought Rosie a slice of apple pie without asking, then refilled Clay's coffee and sat down across from them. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, "about that envelope, about what Vernon said at breakfast." Clay glanced at Rosie. She was focused on her pie, but he knew she was listening. "I know a reporter," June continued, "works for the Billings Gazette, used to come through here back when the copper mines were running. Good man. Knows how to ask questions without making noise." She slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "His name's there. And Clay, I made some calls. Asked around about Vernon's business dealings." June. "Those missing surveyors from last fall, the ones who disappeared after questioning that mineral rights deal on the Crow Reservation. Their names were Thomas and Anna Harper." June looked at Rosie. "That your folks, honey?" Rosie set down her fork, nodded once. June's face went hard as stone. "Clay, whatever's in that envelope, Vernon's willing to kill for it. And if he thinks you're a threat, I know. Then you need to open it, with witnesses, people who'll stand up if he comes at you legal." June pulled out a small photograph from her apron pocket, creased and faded, a young man in uniform smiling. "My boy died in Danong because I believed what the government told me. It took me 10 years to learn the truth, and by then it didn't matter. He was still dead." She looked at Clay. "Don't wait. Some truths cost lives if you sit on them too long." Clay took the photo, looked at it, handed it back. "Who do you trust?" "Doc Sims, Pastor DeWitt, maybe Judge Harlow, if we're lucky." June finished her coffee. "Meet here tomorrow night, after close. I'll get them." Outside, the wind had shifted. Smelled like thaw coming, like mud in March. Rosie climbed into the truck, the envelope still under her coat where she kept it always. "You trust Miss June?" she asked. "More than I trust the law," Clay said. "Sometimes that has to be enough." He started the engine. Through the diner window, he could see June already on the phone, her face set with purpose. Across the street, Vernon climbed into his Lincoln and drove away, tires hissing on wet pavement. In the truck bed, wrapped in brown paper, Rosie's new clothes shifted as they headed home. Tomorrow they'd open the envelope. Tonight, for the first time since the blizzard, Clay felt something besides cold resignation. It wasn't hope exactly, but it was close enough to recognize. The letter came on March 8th, delivered by registered mail. Clay found it nailed to the barn door like a foreclosure notice. Earl stood beside him as he tore it open, both of them smelling of diesel and cold morning air. Management fitness evaluation, pursuant to Partnership Agreement Section 14B. Clay read it twice. The words didn't change. Hearing scheduled March 15th, psychiatric assessment required, evaluator, Dr. Theodore Westbrook, retained by Latimer Land Company. Earl took the paper, scanned it. Vernon's move. Fast one, too. Clay looked toward the house where Rosie was helping Bonnie with breakfast. Through the window, he could see her small shape moving between table and stove, learning to flip pancakes. He waited until she settled in, until it would hurt most. What's the play here? He uses my taking her in as proof I'm unstable. Then he forces the buyout, gets the ranch, and she goes into state custody where no one will believe what she knows. Clay crumpled the paper. Neat and legal. The smell of coffee drifted from the house. Inside, Rosie laughed at something Bonnie said. The first real laugh Clay had heard from her. It cut deeper than any knife. "We fight it," Earl said. "With what? I'm a 52-year-old bachelor who found a kid in a snowstorm and kept her without going through proper channels. I got no legal standing. Vernon's got lawyers and a clause written specifically for this. Then we get our own lawyer. Not in 88 days we don't. Not against Vernon's money." Clay threw the crumpled paper into the mud. He's already won. He just hasn't collected yet. The courthouse in red dust sat on Main Street, brick and limestone, built in 1889 when people still believed in permanence. The heating system banged and wheezed. The radiators hissed like angry snakes. Clay sat in the second row, Earl beside him, while Vernon's lawyer, a woman from Billings in a suit that cost more than most ranches cleared in a month, laid out the case. "Mr. Merrick has exhibited a pattern of concerning behavior," she said, pacing before Judge Harlow's bench. "Sudden acquisition of a minor child, failure to follow proper guardianship protocols, declining ranch profitability." She slid a financial statement across the judge's desk. "And a history of emotional trauma inadequately addressed." Clay's hands tightened on his knees. The financial statement was fabricated. Vernon had access to their books through the partnership. Easy enough to make losses appear where there were none. "The child in question bears evidence of physical trauma," the lawyer continued. "Bruising. Old fractures, according to the medical examination conducted by Dr. Sims. While Mr. Merrick claims these injuries predate his custody, we have no way to verify that claim." Judge Harlow leaned forward. Margaret Harlow, 62, gray hair pulled back severe, reading glasses on a chain. She'd presided over Clay and Martha's marriage license application 30 years ago. "Where is the child now?" "In school, Your Honor. We felt the hearing would be—" "Get her." The lawyer blinked. "Your Honor? You're making accusations about this child's welfare. I want to hear from her. Get her here by noon recess or I'm dismissing this whole circus." Judge Harlow looked at Clay. "Mr. Merrick, you've retained counsel?" "No, ma'am." Her mouth tightened. "Then speak for yourself when called. This isn't a criminal trial, but it's going to determine custody. You understand?" "Yes, ma'am." Dr. Westbrook testified next. 50s, soft hands, voice like a professor discussing something theoretical and distant. He'd interviewed Clay once, 3 days prior, for 45 minutes in a borrowed office at the clinic. "Mr. Merrick presents as emotionally constricted," Westbrook said, reading from notes. "Flat affect, difficulty expressing feelings. When asked about his deceased wife and daughter, he became monosyllabic. When asked about his relationship with the minor child, he described it primarily in terms of utility. She helps with chores, she's learning ranch work, no emotional vocabulary, no indication of genuine paternal bonding." Clay felt Earl shift beside him, wanted to stand up, wanted to shout that of course he didn't spill his grief to a stranger in Vernon's pocket. That some men showed love through teaching and presence, not through words that cost nothing and meant less. But he sat quiet and knew that silence was being used against him. Vernon testified, wore a gray suit and an expression of deep concern. "Clay's been my partner for 12 years. Good man, hard worker, but he's never recovered from losing his family, isolated himself. And now, suddenly taking in this child, I worry it's not about her welfare. I worry it's about him trying to replace what he lost. That's not fair to her. That's not stable. The lawyer called character witnesses, 2 of them. Ranch hands Vernon had fired from Clay's operation last year, both with grudges and empty pockets. They testified about Clay's coldness, his inability to connect, his obsession with work to avoid dealing with emotions. At noon, they brought Rosie in. She wore the new jeans and flannel shirt from Morrison's. Her hair was braided, Bonnie's work. She looked small and scared and utterly alone as the bailiff led her to the witness chair. Judge Harlow's voice gentled. "Hello, Rosie. I'm Judge Harlow. You're not in trouble. I just need to ask you some questions." "All right." Rosie nodded. "How long have you been staying with Mr. Merrick?" "Since January, since he found me." "And how does he treat you?" Rosie looked at Clay. Her eyes were steady. "He saved my life. He teaches me things, how to birth a calf, how to mend fence, how to be patient." Her voice got quieter. "He gave me his wife's quilt, and every morning he makes hot chocolate with marshmallows, like he used to for his little girl." The courtroom went silent except for the radiator's hiss. "Has he ever hurt you?" Judge Harlow asked. "No, ma'am. Those bruises the doctor found. From the crash. When my parents—" Rosie's voice broke. "When they died." Vernon's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, the child is clearly traumatized. She may feel gratitude toward Mr. Merrick for rescuing her, but that doesn't mean the placement is appropriate. Children often defend their abusers. He's not an abuser." Rosie's voice cut through the room, small but fierce. "He's the only person who listened when I said the bad man was coming." "What bad man?" Judge Harlow asked. Rosie looked directly at Vernon. "Him." The courtroom erupted. Vernon's lawyer objected. Judge Harlow's gavel cracked like thunder. Vernon sat frozen, his face a careful mask, but Clay saw the calculation behind his eyes, the measuring, the adjusting, the planning of next moves. Judge Harlow called recess, ordered what Dr. Westbrook's report into evidence, scheduled continuation for the following week. But as they filed out, she pulled Clay aside in the hallway that smelled of floor wax and old justice. "That man's playing a deeper game than custody," she said quietly. "And that child knows something that scares her worse than losing you." She glanced at the envelope Rosie still carried. She'd brought it to court, tucked inside her coat. "Whatever's in there, Mr. Merrick, you better figure out if it's worth fighting for, because Vernon Latimer's not going to stop." Outside, the March sun was warm for the first time all year. Mud season arriving, the streets ran with snowmelt. Rosie stood on the courthouse steps, shivering despite the warmth. Clay put his hand on her shoulder. "You were brave in there. Did I help?" He wanted to say yes, wanted to promise they'd won, but a social worker was walking toward them with paperwork in hand, and Earl's face had gone grim, and June was hurrying across the street with tears in her eyes. The social worker stopped in front of them, young woman, kind eyes, trapped by a system she didn't make. "Mr. Merrick, I'm sorry, Judge has ordered the temporary foster placement pending the continuation hearing, just until things are resolved legally." "No." Rosie grabbed Clay's coat. "No, please." "It's 3 weeks," the social worker said gently. "Just 3 weeks. You'll be with a good family. The Hendersons, they have a daughter your age." "I don't want another family." Rosie was crying now. "I want to go home." Clay knelt down, eye level with her. Every instinct screamed to put her in the truck and drive. Head west, change their names, disappear into the mountains. But Earl's hand on his shoulder steadied him. June's presence beside them reminded him that running made guilty men. 3 weeks, Benidejo, he said to Rosie. "Then we fight again. You hear me? 3 weeks and I'm coming for you." "You promise?" He pulled his grandfather's watch from his pocket. Hadn't wound it in 15 years, but now he twisted the crown, felt the mechanism catch and tick to life, put it in her hands. "Time favors the patient man," he said. "You keep this, wind it every morning, and when the 3 weeks are up, you give it back to me. Deal?" She clutched it like a lifeline, nodded through tears. They took her then, the social worker gentle but firm, leading her to a county sedan. Rosie looked back once, hand pressed against the rear window, watch clutched in her other palm. Clay stood on those courthouse steps and watched her disappear around the corner onto Birch Street. The sun kept shining, the mud kept running, the world kept turning like nothing had been ripped out of it. Earl touched his arm. "We've got 3 weeks to figure this out." He planned it perfect. Clay said. His voice sounded hollow even to himself. Used my care for her as proof I'm unfit. My silence as proof I'm damaged. Took my strength and made it weakness. June wiped her eyes. Then we make weakness into strength. Come on, we've got work to do. But Clay couldn't move yet. Just stood there watching the empty street, feeling something he hadn't let himself feel since Martha and Sarah died. Not grief, worse, hope, and the terrible, crushing fear of losing it again. 3 weeks, 21 days, 504 hours. Clay worked them all. Up before dawn, checking cattle, mending fence. Nobody asked him to mend, splitting wood until his shoulders screamed and his hands bled through the calluses. Bonnie brought casseroles he didn't eat. Earl talked at him while they worked, filling silence with weather observations and cattle prices and nothing that mattered. The house felt wrong, too quiet. The grandfather clock ticked, but it sounded hollow now, counting down to something Clay couldn't name. On the 5th day, Bonnie found Sarah's room stripped bare, sheets washed and folded, window open despite the cold, Clay sitting on the edge of the bed, holding nothing. "She's coming back," Bonnie said. "Maybe." "She is, and when she does, she'll need this room to still be hers." Clay looked at her. "What if I can't protect her? What if Vernon—" "Then we protect her together." Bonnie sat beside him. "That man thinks he can lawyer his way through everything. But there's one thing lawyers can't buy." "What's that?" "People telling the truth when it costs them something." On the 9th day, Clay drove past the Henderson place. Didn't stop, just slowed enough to see Rosie in the yard, swinging on a tire swing. She looked fine, looked cared for, looked like she'd forgotten about an old rancher and a gold watch in 3 weeks that might turn into forever. Then she turned and saw his truck, ran to the fence. He could see her mouth moving, calling something, but he didn't stop. Couldn't. The court order was clear, no contact. Vernon's lawyer would use any violation to bury him. He drove home and sat on his porch until dark, listening to meadowlarks and the distant sound of his own breathing. Earl found him there at midnight. "Doc's been doing research, says Rosie's parents were land surveyors, licensed, working for an investor group questioning Vernon's mineral rights sales." "How many investors?" 47, 2.3 million total. Earl handed him a newspaper clipping. "This ran in November. Harper couple missing after raising concerns about Latimer development deal. Nobody connected it to anything until now." Clay read it twice, looked at the byline. Montana Standard, Butte office. "Vernon had them killed. Can't prove it. Weather could have caused the crash, but the timing—" "It wasn't weather." Clay folded the paper. "That envelope. We need to open it." Judge said no contact with Rosie. That includes her belongings. The envelope's evidence of fraud, maybe murder, that supersedes a custody order. Clay stood. "Get June, get Doc, get Pastor DeWitt if he'll come. Tomorrow night, after the diner closes. We open it with witnesses." Earl studied him. "Vernon finds out. Let him." They gathered at midnight in June's kitchen. The diner had been closed since 9. Main Street dark except for the street lamp by the courthouse and the glow from Doc's clinic across the way. 5 of them around the table. June made coffee nobody drank. Doc brought a camera to photograph everything. Pastor DeWitt said a prayer Clay didn't listen to. Earl stood by the door. Clay laid the envelope on the table. Manila, bent at the corners, water-stained. Latimer, land computer. Fraud, stamped in red across the front. "Whatever's in here," June said. "It got 2 people killed, maybe more. We all understand that?" Nods around the table. Clay broke the seal. Inside, survey maps, geological reports, investor contracts, 47 signatures, each one paying between $30,000 and $70,000 for mineral rights to oil deposits that the surveys, legitimate surveys signed by Thomas and Anna Harper, licensed geologists, proved didn't exist. "Sweet Jesus," Doc whispered. The maps were marked in red pencil. Thomas Harper's handwriting, precise and damning. No oil present. Soil samples negative. Latimer survey, fraudulent. Pastor DeWitt leaned over Clay's shoulder. "He sold them nothing, sold them air and empty ground and walked away with millions." "And when the Harpers figured it out," Earl said, "he made sure they couldn't tell anyone." June was already on the phone. "I'm calling Judge Harlow. She needs to see this tonight." "Wait." Clay spread the investor list, ran his finger down the names, stopped. "June, look. There, halfway down, Daniel Harlow, the judge's brother-in-law. $50,000, lost." June's face went hard. "That's why she's been walking careful. She's got skin in this game, too. Will she recuse herself? Doc asked. Or will she bury it to protect family money? Pastor DeWitt's voice was quiet, sad. Money corrupts, even good people. Clay gathered the papers, started putting them back. Then we need insurance. Doc, you photograph everything. 3 copies. 1 to the state attorney in Helena, 1 to the Billings Gazette, 1 to Judge Harlow directly. We force her hand. Either she does right or we go public and she loses the bench. That's declaring war, Earl said. Vernon declared it when he took Rosie. They worked until 2 in the morning, photographed every page, Doc's camera flash lighting up the kitchen like lightning. When they finished, Clay stood at June's window and looked out at red dust sleeping under stars. Somewhere across town, Rosie was winding his watch, counting days, believing he'd come for her. He touched the window glass, cold under his palm. Spring was coming, but it hadn't arrived yet. 12 days left, he said to no one. 12 days to prove Vernon Latimer was a murderer. 12 days to prove Clay Merrick wasn't crazy for caring. 12 days before he lost everything that mattered for the second time in his life. Vernon's campaign started quiet. A word here, a question there. At the bank, the feed store, the post office. Awful thing Clay Merrick taking in that girl. Makes you wonder about his real motives. Bachelor his age, suddenly desperate for a child. Something's not right. Heard she sleeps in his dead daughter's room. That's healthy, you think? By the 3rd day, the gossip had teeth. Clay felt it at Morrison's when he came in for fence staples. The way Mrs. Morrison's smile didn't reach her eyes. How Dutch Hendricks at the counter went quiet mid-sentence. At the grain elevator, Vernon stood talking to 3 ranch owners. Saw Clay and raised his voice just enough. All I'm saying is, we'd all feel better if there was proper oversight. Man takes in a little girl with no family, no questions asked. In my day, people would have called that suspicious. Clay loaded his grain and left. Didn't rise to it. Knew that's what Vernon wanted. Earl met him at the truck. Pastor DeWitt confronted him this morning, outside the church, called him a liar to his face. What did Vernon say? Smiled, said God's not a judge in this county. Then he drove off. Clay loaded the last bag. His ribs still ached from the calving, his hands were cracked from cold and work, and somewhere across town Rosie was winding his watch and believing he'd keep his promise. 9 days, Clay said. 9 days, Earl agreed. Earl's. They opened the envelope that night, not at the diner this time, too public. At the ranch, in Clay's kitchen, with the doors locked and the shades drawn, 5 witnesses, Clay, Doc, June, Earl, Pastor DeWitt. The table smelled like old paper and coffee and something like fear. Clay broke the seal for the 2nd time. The map spilled out geological surveys with Thomas Harper's signature, marked in red, no oil present. Beneath that, investor contracts, 47 names, $2.3 million, all purchasing mineral rights to deposits that didn't exist. Doc photographed each page with his Polaroid, the flash bright in the dim kitchen. This is fraud, clear as day. And murder motive, Pastor DeWitt added quietly. If the Harpers were going to expose this. June was scanning the investor list, stopped, pointed. There, Daniel Harlow, the judge's brother-in-law, $50,000. The room went silent except for the grandfather clock ticking in the hall. She's compromised, Earl said. Won't be able to rule fair. Or, Doc said slowly, she'll rule exactly fair, because her family got robbed too. Headlights swept the driveway. Everyone froze. Clay moved to the window, saw the Lincoln Continental, Vernon's car, idling at the end of the drive, high beams cutting through the dark. He knows, June whispered. Vernon didn't approach, just sat there, engine running, for 5 long minutes, then backed out and disappeared down the county road. Pastor DeWitt's hand shook as he set down his coffee. That was a message. He's been watching the house, Earl said, waiting to see who shows up. Now he knows we have allies. Clay gathered the papers, started returning them to the envelope. Then we move faster. Doc, those photographs. Can you get them developed by morning? I'll drive to Billings tonight. 1 hour processing place stays open till 2. Make 3 sets. 1 to the state attorney in Helena, 1 to Judge Harlow, 1 to the Billings Gazette. Clay looked at each of them. We force this into daylight. Vernon thrives in shadows. We take those away. June stood. The hearing continuation is in 8 days. If we file evidence before then, Vernon will know we opened it. He'll claim we tampered. Doc packed his camera. But if we wait until the hearing, Rosie stays in foster care 8 more days, Clay finished. And Vernon has 8 more days to make us disappear. The kitchen clock struck 11. Outside, a coyote called from the ridge. Spring was coming. You could smell it in the air, that particular warmth that meant mud and thaw and things frozen too long finally breaking free. "There's one more option," Pastor DeWitt said quietly. "The spring cattle auction, 5 days from now. Whole county shows up. Judge Harlow volunteers as auctioneer every year." He looked at Clay. "If we present the evidence there publicly, with the whole town watching, Vernon can't make that disappear." "That's not a legal proceeding," June said. "No, but it's a community one. And in Red Dust, sometimes that matters more." Pastor DeWitt pulled on his coat. "Judge Harlow's family lost money. So did the Harrisons, the Tates, the Fenwick brothers. Half the ranchers in this county bought Vernon's lies. If they see proof, real proof, in front of witnesses they trust, they'll demand justice." Clay thought about it. 5 days. The auction was tradition, went back 60 years. Everyone came, not just ranchers, bankers, merchants, families, a town gathering. And Judge Harlow always ran the auction, same gavel she used in court. "It's not legal," Earl said again. "Neither was killing the Harpers," Clay replied. "Doc, get those photographs made. 3 copies, like I said, but hold them. Don't send them yet." He looked at Pastor DeWitt. "Can you get Rosie to that auction?" "Church youth outing. Perfectly legal. I'll clear it with the social worker." "Do it." Clay folded the envelope closed. 5 days. We bring the evidence, we bring Rosie, we bring the whole damn town, and we make Vernon answer for what he did. After they left, Clay sat alone in his kitchen. The clock ticked. Outside, spring tried to arrive. He thought about Rosie winding his watch each morning, about Vernon's headlights in his driveway, about how truth was supposed to matter, but usually didn't, unless you forced people to see it. 5 days to April 17th. 5 days to prove that justice could still happen in a place small enough to remember your name. Vernon came at midnight on April 9th. Clay heard the Lincoln's engine first, that particular hum of money and maintenance cutting through the spring night. He was on the porch, couldn't sleep, watching stars and thinking about promises he might not keep. The car stopped at the end of the driveway. High beams on. Vernon got out slow, stood in the light like an actor taking the stage. "We need to talk, Clay." "Oh, get off my land." "Your land." Vernon walked closer. The cologne reached before he did, sweet and chemical. "That's interesting phrasing, considering the partnership agreement gives me equal claim to operational decisions, and considering the buyout clause activates in 8 days. Clay's hand moved toward the rifle leaning against the porch rail. "Don't." Vernon's voice stayed calm. "I'm not here for that. I'm here to offer you a deal." "Not interested." "You haven't heard it yet." Vernon climbed the porch steps uninvited. "The girl goes into state custody. You sign over your share of the ranch. Walk away clean. I'll even throw in $250,000 as severance, enough to start over somewhere else." "And the envelope?" "Gets forgotten, along with whatever wild theories you've been building." Vernon leaned against the rail. "Clay, I know what you think you know, but you can't prove murder. Weather caused that crash. Tragic accident. Even if you had evidence of business irregularities, and I'm not saying you do, that's civil court. Years of litigation. Expensive lawyers. Meanwhile, that girl stays in the system and you lose everything anyway." The night smelled like wet earth and diesel exhaust. From the barn, a horse nickered. Spring sounds, frogs in the creek, an early meadowlark testing its voice. "Why?" Clay asked. "Why kill them?" Vernon's mask slipped for just a second. "Because Thomas Harper wouldn't listen. Because he insisted on doing the right thing. Because some people don't understand that business requires flexibility." He caught himself, smiled. "Hypothetically speaking." "You're confessing." "I'm offering you a way out, take it or don't. But, Clay, accidents happen. The Harpers learned that. Others could too. Girls in foster care, they disappear into the system all the time. And old ranchers, living alone, working too hard, not taking care of themselves, heart attacks, equipment failures, things that look perfectly natural." Clay's hand closed on the rifle. One shot, end it here, Vernon dead on his porch. Justice served the old way, the frontier way. But Earl was inside, listening through the window, and Pastor DeWitt had driven up quiet 5 minutes ago, parked out down the road, was standing in the shadows by the barn. Witnesses, people Clay had asked to come, knowing Vernon would show eventually. Witnesses meant law, meant doing it right instead of doing it fast. Clay's hand left the rifle. "That's your answer?" Vernon asked. "Get off my land." Vernon straightened. 8 days, Clay. Then it's all mine. The ranch, the cattle, the legacy your grandfather built. All because you couldn't let one little girl go. He walked to his car, turned back. "And just so we're clear, that auction idea you're planning? I know about it. Try to present anything there, and I'll have you arrested for evidence. Tampering, harassment, and violating the court's no-contact order. You'll lose custody permanently and spend the next year fighting charges." The Lincoln's taillights disappeared down the county road. Earl came out onto the porch. Pastor DeWitt emerged from the barn, both their faces grim. "We heard it," Earl said. "Every word." "Will it matter?" Clay asked. "He didn't say I killed them, not directly." Pastor DeWitt's voice was heavy. "Said enough to make us certain, but not enough for a prosecutor." Clay sat on the porch steps. His hands were shaking. Rage, or fear, or exhaustion, he couldn't tell anymore. "He's right. I try to fight him legal, I lose. Try to fight him any other way, I lose. Either way, Rosie ends up alone, and he gets everything." "Then we change the game," Earl said. "How?" "The auction's in 8 days, same day the buyout activates." Earl sat beside him. "We don't present evidence. We don't make accusations. We just let the community decide." "Decide what?" "Who they trust, who they'd buy cattle from, who they believe." Earl's voice was steady. "Vernon's got the law, but we've got something he can't lawyer his way around. 50 years of you being a decent man. That counts for something." Pastor DeWitt nodded. "In Red Dust, a man's word still matters. His reputation, the way he treats people when nobody's watching. Vernon's rich and smooth and says the right things, but people know. Deep down they know." "Know what?" Clay asked. "That you'd walk through fire for that girl, and he'd burn her alive if it protected his investment." Pastor DeWitt pulled his coat tight against the night chill. "Sometimes faith isn't about proof, Clay. It's about who you choose to believe when the evidence is thin." They sat there until dawn started graying the eastern sky. Somewhere in town, Rosie would be waking up, winding the watch, counting days. 7 left. 7 days to make the biggest gamble of Clay's life, betting that in a world run by money and lawyers and men like Vernon Latimer, there was still room for something as fragile and stubborn as trust. April 17th came warm, the smell of thaw and mud and cattle. Spring arriving for real this time, not just threatening. The auction barn sat on the east edge of Red Dust, built in 1924 from rough pine and optimism. It smelled like livestock and sawdust and 50 years of deals made on handshakes. By noon, the parking lot was full, trucks and sedans and a few tractors driven straight from the fields. Clay stood outside, watching people arrive. Dutch Hendricks, the Morrison brothers, families he'd known 40 years. Vernon's Lincoln pulled in at 12:30, parked close to the exit. Earl touched Clay's shoulder. "Pastor's getting her now." Across town, Pastor DeWitt was loading Rosie into the church van with 6 other kids, all signed permission slips and official youth outing paperwork, legal as Sunday. The social worker had approved it personally. Inside the barn, Judge Harlow stood at the auctioneer's podium, checking the microphone. She wore her usual auction clothes, denim and boots, hair tied back, the same woman who'd sit court tomorrow in black robes. In Red Dust, you wore whatever hat the day required. Clay found June in the crowd. She nodded once. Doc Sims stood near the back, camera ready. 40, 50, maybe 60 people filling the bleachers. The gavel came down at 1 o'clock sharp. "All right, folks," Judge Harlow said. "Let's get started. First lot, Clay Merrick's spring heifers, 20 head Angus Cross, vaccinated and tagged." The bidding started normal. Numbers called, hands raised. Clay's cattle were good stock, everyone knew it. The price climbed steady. Then Vernon stood. "Judge Harlow, before we proceed, I need to invoke partnership authority. Under our agreement, I'm halting this sale pending resolution of management fitness issues." The barn went silent. Judge Harlow looked at him over her reading glasses. "Mr. Latimer, this is a livestock auction, not a corporate meeting. The cattle are partnership assets. I have legal standing to block their sale until the buyout is finalized." Vernon pulled papers from his jacket. "Which, as of today, it is. Mr. Merrick has been found unfit to manage operations. The 90-day review period ended this morning. Therefore, these cattle are now under my authority." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Clay felt the ground shifting under him. That's a court matter, Judge Harlow said carefully. This is, Your Honor, Clay's voice cut through the barn. I'd like to request something. It's an old tradition. Community character testimony. Before a major business decision, a man gets to hear from those who know him. Judge Harlow's eyes met his. Something passed between them, an understanding maybe, or permission. This isn't a court proceeding, she said slowly. No, ma'am. It's better. It's neighbors talking to neighbors. Vernon's lawyer stood. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. So's a lot of things. Judge Harlow set down her gavel. I'll allow it. Anyone wants to speak about Clay Merrick's character, now's the time. Doc Sims stood first, walked to the front, his limp pronounced from the hip he'd broken years back. I've known Clay 30 years. He's brought more calves and colts through hard births than most vets. Never asked for credit. When his wife and daughter died, he could have broken, could have drunk himself to death or eaten a bullet. Instead, he worked, he endured. That's not weakness, that's the strongest thing I've ever seen. Earl went next. Worked for Clay's family since 1946. 3 generations. Clay's grandfather taught me that a man's measured by what he does when nobody's watching. Clay measures up. June's voice shook but held. January 28th, Clay found a dying child in a blizzard. He didn't call social services first, didn't check if it was legal or proper. He saved her life, then he gave her a home. Some folks call that unstable. I call it human. One by one, they stood. Ranchers, shopkeepers, people Clay barely knew but who'd watched him, measured him, decided he was worth defending. Then the church van pulled up outside. Pastor DeWitt came through the barn door with 7 kids. Rosie saw Clay and broke free, running across sawdust and cattle smell and 3 weeks of separation. Clay caught her, held on. She was crying, he was crying, and the whole barn had gone silent. I wound it every day, she whispered, pressing the watch into his palm. Every single day. I know. His voice broke. I know you did. Vernon stood. Your Honor, this is a clear violation of the no-contact order. Sit down, Mr. Latimer. Judge Harlow's voice had gone cold. Rosie turned to face the crowd, small and fierce and done being quiet. My name is Rosie Harper. My parents were Thomas and Anna Harper. They were land surveyors. They found out Mr. Latimer was lying about oil on the reservation land. They were going to tell everyone. Then they died in a snowstorm. But it wasn't the storm, it was him. She walked to the podium, pulled the manila envelope from her coat. She'd had it this whole time, Pastor DeWitt smuggling it back to her that morning, placed it on the judge's stand. These are the real surveys, my daddy's surveys. They prove there's no oil. They prove Mr. Latimer stole $2 million from 47 people. She looked at Judge Harlow. Your brother-in-law's name is on the list. He lost $50,000. Judge Harlow opened the envelope. Her hands shook as she spread the papers. Geological surveys, investor contracts, Thomas Harper's signature in red notations, no oil present. Vernon's face had gone white. That evidence is inadmissible. It's been tampered with. Has it? Judge Harlow looked up. Because I'm seeing signatures, dates, official state licensing stamps. I'm seeing my own family's name on a contract for mineral rights that, according to these surveys, don't exist. She stood. Mr. Latimer, I'm not a judge right now. I'm an auctioneer and a citizen. And as a citizen, I'm calling Sheriff Hayes. Vernon moved toward the door. Earl stepped in front of it. Sheriff's already outside, Earl said. Got a call about 20 minutes ago. Something about new evidence in a fraud investigation. Through the barn door, red and blue lights flashed. Sheriff Hayes walked in with 2 deputies, all business. Vernon Latimer, he said. You're under arrest for suspicion of fraud and conspiracy. You have the right, Vernon lunged at Rosie. Clay stepped between them, and Vernon pulled a knife from his jacket. Small, folding, meant for cutting baling twine, but sharp enough to kill. She's a liar, Vernon's voice cracked. She's a child who doesn't understand business. I understand murder, Rosie said quietly. The knife wavered. Vernon looked at the faces around him. 60 people who'd heard everything, who'd seen him threaten a 9-year-old girl with a blade. The mask was gone completely now, just a desperate man with nothing left to lose. Sheriff Hayes moved, fast for a man his age, disarmed Vernon in 2 moves and had him in cuffs before he could run. As they let him out, Vernon looked back at Clay. You self-righteous son of a... You think this matters? Think you won? I'll fight this. I'll tie it up in court for years. That ranch is still mine. Actually, Judge Harlow said, reading through the papers, according to these investor contracts, your assets are now subject to seizure pending fraud investigation. That includes your share of the Merrick Ranch partnership. She looked at Clay. Congratulations, Mr. Merrick. You just became sole owner. The barn erupted, cheering, gavel pounding. Rosie pressed against Clay's side, his arm around her shoulders, both of them shaking with relief or shock or something beyond words. June appeared with coffee, Doc with his camera, documenting everything. Earl just stood there grinning like a fool. Judge Harlow banged her gavel until the noise died. Now then, we still got cattle to auction, and Mr. Merrick's heifers are excellent stock. Do I hear opening bid? The bidding started at market rate, climbed fast, climbed higher, men bidding not because they needed the cattle, but because they needed to say something, needed to cast a vote that mattered. Clay's heifers sold for 30% above market value. Every single head. When it finished, Judge Harlow looked at Clay. Mr. Merrick, I'll be signing permanent guardianship papers first thing tomorrow morning. Any objections? No, ma'am. Good. She turned to Rosie. Young lady, you've got more courage than most adults I know. Your parents would be proud. Rosie's voice was small but steady. Thank you, ma'am. Outside, the April sun was warm. Real warm, not just promising. Clay and Rosie walked to his truck through mud and new grass. The watch ticked in his pocket, wound and working, keeping time like it was supposed to. Can I really stay? Rosie asked. Forever, Clay said. If you want, I want. They drove home through spring. The adoption papers came through on May 1st. Judge Harlow signed them in her chambers. No ceremony, just the scratch of pen on paper and a handshake that meant everything. She's yours legally now, the judge said. But I suspect she's been yours considerably longer than that. Clay folded the papers, put them in his jacket pocket. Thank you, Your Honor. Don't thank me. Thank that girl for being brave enough to speak. And Mr. Merrick. She paused at the door. My brother-in-law got his $50,000 back. Vernon's seized assets are being distributed to the investors. It'll take time, but everyone's getting made whole. And Vernon? State attorney's building the case. Fraud's certain. The Harper deaths? She shook her head. Harder to prove, but he'll spend years in prison regardless. That'll have to be enough. It was. Not justice exactly, but close enough for Clay to sleep at night. Spring settled in proper. The ranch work multiplied. Calving, branding, fence repair, irrigation ditches needing cleared. Rosie worked alongside Clay and Earl, learning the rhythms, how to read weather, how to spot a sick calf, how to mend what was broken and know when to let something go. She still had nightmares, still woke up crying some nights, calling for parents who couldn't answer. Clay would sit on the edge of her bed, Sarah's bed, Rosie's bed now, and wait until the shaking stopped. You're safe, he'd say. I know. But her hand would find his and hold on until morning. Bonnie taught her to bake bread. June taught her to make pie crust. Doc taught her the names of birds, meadowlark and killdeer and the red-tailed hawks that circled the high pastures. On May 15th, they held a funeral. Clay and Rosie drove to the crash site on Highway 29. Pastor DeWitt met them there with a simple wooden cross Earl had carved. They planted it beside the road where the station wagon had been. Anna and Thomas Harper, they told the truth. Rosie placed wildflowers at the base, lupine and paintbrush, prairie colors, stood there a long time, Clay's hand on her shoulder, the wind moving through new grass. You think they'd be mad? She asked. That I chose you instead of staying sad? I think they'd be grateful you found someone to keep you safe. Do you think they're with your Martha and Sarah, wherever people go? Clay had stopped believing in much after the accident, but standing there with spring all around and this girl who'd survived everything, he found he could believe in that. Yeah, he said. I think maybe they are. They drove home as the sun dropped low and golden. The ranch settled into new patterns. Rosie took over the chicken coop, 18 hens and a rooster mean as sin. She gathered eggs every morning, talking to the birds like they understood. Maybe they did. Hope, the calf she'd helped birth, grew strong and curious. Followed Rosie around the pasture like a dog. Earl said it was the damnedest thing he'd ever seen, but his eyes were soft when he said it. On the 22nd of May, Clay found Rosie in the barn with his grandfather's watch. She'd wound it but wasn't putting it away. Something wrong with it? He asked. No, She held it out. I think it should go to someone who needs it more than me. Who's that? You. You stopped winding it when they died, but you wound it for me, so maybe... She pressed it into his palm. Maybe you should keep it going. For both of us. Clay looked at the gold case, the engraving he'd memorized as a boy. Time favors the patient man. He'd been patient through 15 years of grief, through 3 weeks of losing Rosie to a system that didn't care, through a fight that could have cost him everything. He wound the watch, put it in his pocket. Deal. But you're in charge of reminding me when I forget. Every morning, she said, before chores. They shook on it, small hand and calloused one, a promise that didn't need lawyers or papers to mean something. Sunday dinners became tradition. June and Doc and Earl and Bonnie and Pastor DeWitt crowding around Clay's table, filling the house with noise and laughter and the smell of pot roast. The first time, Rosie asked if she could say grace. They bowed their heads, and she spoke, voice clear and sure. Thank you for this food. Thank you for these people. Thank you for second chances, and for fathers who keep promises. Amen. When she looked up, every adult at the table was crying. Well, June said, wiping her eyes, pass the potatoes before I completely lose it. After everyone left, Clay and Rosie sat on the porch watching stars come out. The air smelled like cut hay and wood smoke from June's chimney down the valley. Pa? Rosie's voice was soft. When you found me, did you know that you'd keep me? Clay thought about it, about the blizzard and the bodies and the small weight in his arms, about how he'd said words that felt true before he knew why. I knew you needed saving, he said finally, and I knew I needed something to save. Guess we were both lucky. She leaned against him. He put his arm around her shoulders. The grandfather clock chimed 9 inside, time moving forward, patient and steady, favoring those who waited for it. From the barn, hope lowed soft. The chickens settled on their roosts, spring edged toward summer, and the ranch that had been a tomb for 15 years felt like a home again. Not because the grief was gone, but because there was finally something living inside it again. Something worth protecting, something worth the fight. They planted the tree in June, a young cottonwood, same species that grew at the crash site. Clay and Rosie dug the hole together on the hillside overlooking the ranch. The valley spread green below them, cattle grazing and the creek running silver in morning light. Earl had carved a marker, simple pine, weatherproofed. Anna and Thomas Harper, they told the truth. Pastor DeWitt came to bless it. June brought pie. Doc brought his camera. 20 townspeople showed up without being asked, bringing shovels and water and quiet respect. When the tree was planted and tamped firm, Rosie spoke. No prepared words, just what came. Mama and Daddy were brave. They could have stayed quiet and stayed safe. But they told the truth even when it cost everything. I'm going to be brave too, like them, like Pa. She looked at Clay, like everyone here who stood up when it mattered. Clay added soil around the roots. His hands were the same hands that had pulled her from the snow, that had fought for her in court, that had taught her to wind a watch and birth a calf and believe the world could still be good. They gave you truth, he said. We'll give you home. The cottonwood's leaves moved in the breeze, that particular whisper sound that meant summer was coming. Walking back down the hill, Rosie's hand found his. Pa, when the tree grows big, can we hang a swing? Clay looked at her. 9 years old, hair in braids Bonnie had taught her to make. Boots muddy from honest work, eyes clear and unafraid. He thought about swings, about Sarah, who'd love them, about second chances and chosen family, and how love wasn't something you inherited. It was something you built, one careful day at a time. Already bought the rope, he said. Behind them, the young tree stood against blue sky. Ahead, the ranch spread out like a promise kept, and between them, in Clay's pocket, his grandfather's watch ticked steady and patient, measuring time that finally meant something again.